Hi everybody. So I'm just hanging out in the yard again. Once again, got done with a workout. Been keeping up with that pretty hardcore. And I'm already starting to feel like the improvement as far as how long I last on certain exercises and stuff. But that's not what this video is about. Now, usually when I put up a poll, I try to do a poll response video within a couple of weeks. I happened to post this poll before I left the Bay Area. And I just didn't get to it because obviously life began to change really rapidly at that point. And I'd have to say how I feel about it now is probably different than how I would have felt a month ago when I posted it. And basically I posted a poll that said, is van life just homelessness or something like that? Let me see what I actually posted. It's so far down now I have to scroll for a bit. All right, where are we at? Almost there. Okay, so the actual wording of the question was, is van life in the city, on city streets, just homelessness by another name? Feel free to explain in the comments, which is always open, of course. 7% said yes, 32% said no. 10% says depend on the person, and 51% said depends on the situation. Now, you might ask why I separated depends on the person and depends on the situation. And it's because I feel like those are two different things. Sometimes I feel like you can be in the situation and it was beyond your control, but you as an individual person don't necessarily feel trapped by your situation. Like, your situation is what it is, and then you allow yourself to empower yourself from the situation, because you can't change the situation, but you can change you. And that's why I said it depends on the person, and made that different from depends on the situation, which I think is very self-explanatory, because I feel like if you look at me as a person, I don't feel homeless. If you look at the situation, then I am homeless. And what's interesting is most people, more people pick depend on the situation than depends on the person. So that was very interesting. Very few people defaulted to yes, and a lot of people defaulted to no, but the most popular answer was actually depends on the situation. To me, depends on the person is actually more valid, but I didn't clarify those on purpose just to see how people will respond. All right, so I'm going to read the top rated comment, top rated by likes and responses by other people. And the top rated comment with 10 likes basically says, I reserve the right to change my opinion, but on first blush, here are my thoughts. When I'm generally feeling badly, I'm homeless. When I think the homeless need an advocate, I'm homeless. When I acknowledge that I've made an economic choice, I'm not homeless. And I think that gets back to the depends on the person, depends on the situation thing. And there are very specific situations where this response indicates an advocate is needed for the purpose of numbers, for the purpose of clarity. And I think economically, I agree. The level at which this was my choice versus the level at which this was my situation, all the ways that it impact me as quote unquote not a choice are more important to conversations we have about paying people fairly, and just general human efforts to be better humans to people, so that everybody who needs it has access to their fairly basic needs. And the thing is, the world is just unbalanced. Like, people tend to pretend that if you work hard enough, then you will see the benefits of that in certain ways, and that's just not true. There are people who work their self to the bone from the day they can work until the day they drop dead, and they never actually get that far. Now, mind you, you can't get nothing. Oh, this should fly. Now, mind you, you can't get forward by doing nothing, but you can do a lot of stuff, something, and still not move forward. And so when it comes to sort of creating a world where people can at least have their basics, yes, it's important to advocate in certain ways, But also, when I look at me internally and who I am and how I have adapted to the situation presented to me, I think it's more who I am as a person and less the situation I'm in that defines how I, see this whole idea of being quote unquote homeless or not. Now, before somebody pipes on and say it, I know that legally, if you don't have a residence that you live in that is an identified address by the U.S. government, you are homeless in that very legal status. But how you deal with yourself on a daily basis, the feeling may be different, and that's been the point of this poll. So before people jump in with technicalities, I understand technicalities. All right. All right, so let's look at some other highly rated comments. This one's great. Home is where the heart is, and who's to say where that home should be? Nicholas says, I think for me, the defining line is choice. If someone has the option to live in a house or an apartment, but prefers living in a van, then their van is their home. And I don't think anybody debates that. I think the grand question is, let's say you didn't choose to have to live out of a vehicle. Let's say you had to live in your car or your van, but somewhere along the way, you're like, you know what? I can make this a power choice and not a situation I'm trapped in. And that's sort of like, obviously a lot of these glampers, I guess is a term somebody used. These sort of glamour vans, the big ones, the one when you open them up, it looks like, a nice tiny apartment. Obviously, those people have 100% chosen and were able to prepare a space before they even sort of disconnected themselves from having standard housing, if they even did so. Because some people didn't, like they went on the road and they rented out their house, or, in some way they still have like legally recognized property as a home. Like some people do that, but some people like they stay in their house long enough to prepare their van or their RV or whatever, and then they go on the road and then let go of their homes. And people always say, absolutely, those people like obviously aren't homeless, like they've chosen their path. But I also think you can end up in a situation by accident and choose your path. I think most people would consider Bob Wells a nomad by choice, but Bob Wells didn't start down this path by choice. It was by situation. And yet you look at him today and like, he's basically a business owner. He's made a business out of his situation. And so in that way, there's a point where it becomes a choice, even though it started by the situation. So yes, if you choose to, and you like literally knows if this doesn't work, I can move back into an apartment or a house tomorrow, then it's probably a choice very clearly. But if you don't have those options, but you're still like, I don't feel trapped in a certain way, then what's that line there? Does it get a little bit gray there? Because that's where I would consider myself. Like right now, I'm lucky, due to a job, I have a place to stay, but that could change tomorrow. It could change next week. It will change. At a certain point by necessity. So, and I can't go from here to anywhere but my van. Like if I decided, oh my God, this is wonderful and I love apartment living, I don't, then I would still have to stay in my situation. And so it gets into an interesting gray space is sort of my response to that. That was a really long sideways by me. Let me look at some more of these top rated comments. So here's one that says, it depends on the situation. I lived in my van for 2 years and it was my home. I had other places to go, but I preferred to be in my van. I recently moved back into an apartment, but I miss being in my van. So I think it depends on the situation. And I would almost argue that this is actually about it depending on the person more than the situation. And I think having those two options really confuse people because it sounds like, your situation didn't demand anything. It sounds like this was a complete decision on your part. You were comfortable with it and you could get out of it anytime you wanted to. So here's one that addresses the very technical definition. It says homelessness is classified as those who don't own or rent a house, apartment. I've been quote unquote homeless since I got out of the Army in 2008. Lived in a tool shed, a truck camper, a couple of vans, etc. I also rented a few times, vowing to never sign another lease. Homelessness is not negative or positive. It's what you do with it that makes it a positive or negative. And if you just look at it as a technical term, by the governmental definition, that's true. Even the glam vans, if they choose to let go of a house by all legal laws, they are homeless. They're everybody who chooses to live this lifestyle and completely disconnects from having a standard home is legally homeless, no matter how much money they have in the bank, and that's just a fact. But it is, again, this gets back to me saying the difference between it depends on the person and it depends on the situation. It's about how you as a person sort of take power in the situation you're in. And the truth is, I've seen people who are low income who are like, I hate this, and they figure out how to get back into standard housing if it's really that much of a passion for them and they're really motivated. Like, it is possible, and it's just a question of, have you found power sort of in where you are or not? And I feel like I have. So yeah, we're going to keep scrolling through here. And also, like, I found a way to use it as a purpose towards the thing I wanted to do. The things I have been able to say yes and no to for work would not have been possible if I hadn't let go of the idea of living a standard and, socially socially acceptable path. If I hadn't rejected the idea of a socially acceptable path, I never would have gotten, and I don't know what's going to happen to the theater industry on the other side of this, because so much of theater is, personal communications, packing people in together, being close. Like, I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side of this, but all the things I've done, all the things I've accomplished, especially in this past year, would not have been possible unless I had rejected the standard lifestyle. So it's really about, like, okay, I'm in this situation. This is my only choice at my exact moment. What is my priority? And my priority was still making it in the career I had chosen. If your priority is, I need to get out of this car and get into standard housing, your choices are going to be different. And it was, at the beginning, very low. It was like, I need to make it through today. I need to make this work. Oh, look how making this work lowers my cost of living. Oh, look at the opportunities I have to move towards the thing I want to do by staying in this lifestyle, as it were. And so the priority became the things I could accomplish by not getting a standard job and continuing to pursue the path I wanted to pursue. Which is very different from most, like, there's so much van life that's just about, like, cutting strings and, like, living free, which doesn't exist. Life always costs something. It's a lie, people, it's a lie. So here's a comment that's a depends on the situation comment. Depends on the situation. If a person has intentionally prepared their dwelling for habitation, whether it be a vehicle, a tent, a hut, sorry, I can't speak, then it is a home. That person is not homeless. They live in non-traditional housing. If a person has no place to live and they take shelter in their unprepared car or vehicle by necessity and not by choice, then they are homeless. It's just like a squatter who breaks into an abandoned house is homeless, even though they're in a building. They live under a roof, but it's temporary and uncertain day to day. And I think this is a very, very, very good comment. Like, I personally would have high rated this comment. Because this is very true. And what does it mean to prepare? Like, my first preparation of my van was a camping cot and some plastic bins, and that's what I was going to use to get through until I could get better. But there was this mental state of, I got this, I'm going to turn this into a home. And even though it wasn't like the fanciest, glampiest, like prettiest van ever, even by minivan camper standards, it was a choice and there was preparedness in it. So even if your preparedness is like throwing in a sleeping bag and going to buy like a container for water and a camping stove, you are preparing a space to live in. And there's this different mental state that goes into that, more than I have nowhere to go tonight and I guess I'm sleeping in this car. And I definitely was there at the beginning of my journey. Like, all I had was a car. I didn't have the minivan, and I was basically leaning back a front seat and going to sleep. And that very much felt like I was disconnected from the traditions of a home. Whereas, like, once I got the minivan and, I had a space to make, and some people live fine out of cars. I met a woman who lives tiny in a car, and she's doing an amazing job. She's rocking it. She's from Canada. But she prepared that space, and she like saw a space in that vehicle where she was like, I can alter and like change this to make it into a home. And she did, in a way that works for her. And for me, like, getting the minivan, that was the moment where it was like I wasn't changing something that wasn't bought for that reason into something to live in. I bought something to live in, and I began to prepare that space as something that I could survive in at first. But then, like, it was just home. Like, that's what I prepared as home. When I went back to my van, it was home. Like, there was never like, oh, this is a transitional point or insecure. It's like, if you stay in a shelter, and let's say you're going to be in that shelter for months, you're technically underneath a roof, but you're still like very like homeless, because it isn't a place you can settle in. It's not yours, and your situation could change tomorrow if something about the rules of the place change. Like, right now, I have no control over the housing I'm in. It's not mine. I don't control it. At any moment, I could have to leave it. Whereas, like, with my van, it's mine. On a day-to-day basis, there's no reason to believe it's not mine. It's been prepared for me. I've altered it to my comforts. It's a completely different mental space. So I really agree with that comment, is my long way of saying it. I think it was one of the best comments I've read that sort of made that distinction, because it's not about, to me, being quote unquote forced into it or not. It's about how much you're preparing yourself or the vehicle to say, this is home for a set amount of time that I set, and I'm going to make it as comfortable of a home as it is for me. Here's a good one. This is also a really great comment that I'd love to read. And it says, I've talked about this with people a lot as I prepare to move into my van. Homelessness is a state of mind. There are people living in the street or living in their vehicle who wish to be housed. They're not happy without a physical home. Those I would consider homeless. However, there's a group of people who wish to live a more nomadic lifestyle, who believe home is in the heart. Wherever you lay your head is home. They can consider a tent a home, or a van, car, hammock, whatever. I wouldn't consider them homeless. It's all your own perception. People will probably call me homeless when I'm in my van, but I wouldn't consider myself without a home. Not all of us are meant to be confined to four walls. I would say four static walls, because technically there's walls in the van. So yeah, I think that's a very, very good perspective. I struggle with words so much, y'all. And I think it's really just the wish. Do you wish? In most moments, everybody wishes for more. Like, I've made no secret of the fact that I would love to get a bigger van, but I'm fine. Like, there's no moment of suffering. Like, I am fine. I can get by. I mean, obviously, the state of the world right now, it makes everything a little bit more difficult. Like, I feel like it's not smart to go home. Like, as long as I can stay where I am right now, it's a much more secure and safe and resource ready position to be in. But also, if that changed tomorrow, I know I have a vehicle I can go climb into and live out of for, whenever. If I need to go drive it out and find some place I can park it, I'm going to drive it out and find some place I can park it. But, it really is about a state of mind, whatever people think. And for me, that's more about, it depends on the person, because it's really about this. It's not about how big the vehicle is or how fancy the vehicle is. It's about, like, this is home, and I don't really think of it as anything else. So yeah. And that's also why I made the distinction, because it's more city campers who get that stereotype. than people out, in campgrounds. But the crazy thing is, you go to a place like Slab City, there are people there who don't want to be there. They just don't know what else to do with themselves. And those people aren't happy. And even though they don't have to stealth camp and hide, and can have very public open spaces where they're interacting and behaving, there are people who've chosen that and they're like, cool, this is great. This is a very liberated lifestyle. And there's people who are stuck there. And don't feel like they have a choice and feel like they got somewhere they didn't want to be. So I don't think that perspective is limited to the people we see every day. I think it is way far spread, and there are people who just don't know any other way to survive. And if that's all you're doing, I question if you're really happy in your nomadic lifestyle, if you feel trapped by it in any way. I always say it, and I'll say it again, desk jobs exist. There's all kind of jobs that exist that would just pay the bills better than pursuing what I went to college for, which is sad to say. But I've made the choice to pursue the career that I care about. And if this lifestyle is more flexible into me getting in that career, that's ultimately more important to me. All right, so I'm going to just read a couple more comments here. Nope. I sincerely choose to leave my condo in one of the nicest suburbs because I want my money in my pocket and my family versus paying someone else's mortgage and an HOA with terrible parking lots and no true playground for my baby. I personally can rent an apartment today or room with somebody. But honestly, I love my van life. I've slept in front or on the side of a few friends' homes in our van, and they couldn't understand why I wouldn't come in. But like I told them, I like my own space, and my house is cozy with everything I need. Thanks, but no thank you. I feel the same way. Even if I was in somebody's lot, I think I'd like my space. I've set up my space for myself. Even if I was at somebody's house, I think I'd still be spending a lot of time in my van if I was in the driveway. Because that's my home. That's where my stuff is. I know how the world works there. There's some conveniences that would be great to go into a house for. But mostly, my house is set up for me. And I live on it on a day-to-day basis. And, being in somebody's driveway only changes, a few factors that it'll be comfortable to go in a house for. Well, here's a very factual answer. Homeless, because I've had the knock and answered, yes, I live in my van to the police. That's a very direct answer. I think it depends on the person and how they feel about the situation. There is nothing wrong with being homeless in this economic climate. And living in a van beats the hell out of sleeping under a bridge. And it can be nice. You could make it a home. It may be a choice from the start for some people. Others may have no choice initially, but discover that it's more secure and financially responsible to live in their vehicle. Some people may absolutely hate it and be desperate to move back into a house. It depends. It's not cut and dry. And I think that's the perfect comment. So I'm actually going to end there. There were a lot of other cool comments, but I said at the beginning of the video, my perspective on this is only slightly different than how I felt when I posted the poll. And I had very clear thoughts about it when I posted the poll, but always I like to see what you guys think, sort of how you guys respond to it. Because there are moments when I'm asking myself, how much of this channel is about a nomad by choice and how much of this channel is about a homeless person surviving. And honestly, I think it's both. Because on one hand, I feel empowered by my choice. I found empowerment in my choice. I have made it. I've made my life better consistently. I've improved the van over time. What I started with and what I have now is so radically different. I sometimes look at my old videos and forget, sort of what the van looked like, in an earlier stage. All the things I've experimented with, because you just keep shifting and changing to make the space more comfortable, which you do in a traditional house as well. In traditional housing, you move in and you start kind of putting stuff in spaces where you think they are, and then in a few months you realize what you thought you were going to use that space for, you're not using it for, and you might change it up. So that kind of stuff happens in traditional housing as well. Where it is difficult, and right now is a really great example, is right now it's difficult to get to a lot of the resources that you don't feel like you need 100% like in your quote unquote house. And so in that way, it can be a little bit more difficult than traditional housing. So like, some van lifers have fridges, some don't. Almost all RVers do. What kind of food you can have if you need to be away from the world, like really away for longer periods of time, is harder. You have to make different choices when you're in a van versus when you're in traditional housing, for a multitude of reasons, from the space of your vehicle to, your electricity and how functional a system you have for recharging. Like, there are people who depend on like going to a friend's house, getting their little power bank charged, getting it back at a certain point in the day, and using that to get through the night, especially if they work during the day and live in a vehicle and sleep in it overnight before going back to work the next morning. Some people, like, I know people who've said like they've been able to use showers and resources at their job, meaning like the needs specifically within the van were smaller because there was a shower at their job, and there was a refrigeration and all these other things. So as long as they could sleep in the van, that access to things they had at their job opened some doors and allowed them to really limit their living space a lot, and therefore save money. And as jobs are starting to be deemed non-essential and people are starting to get laid off and all those things, access to those things are breaking off. Many gyms around the country are closed, and so like a lot of people's option for a traditional shower is either completely gone, limited, or like they have to go to like truck stops, because truck drivers are obviously still delivering goods around the country, so truck stops are open, and so those people are depending on truck stop showers, or they're going to need to do what I used to do in the van, which is like sponge bath it out. And I know plenty of people who depend on that, who have really dirty jobs, who smell okay. I know we think we absolutely need to pour like a bunch of water over our head in order to get clean, which is weird, because showers haven't always existed, but we feel like the entire world is broken without them. Like, you can't possibly be a clean individual without a shower, despite the fact there is, showers were invented at a certain point. They didn't always exist, and there have always been alternate ways to get clean. But, even still, the default answer for most van lifers, because, 90% of vans do not have showers, and even some smaller RVs don't necessarily have showers. Some truck campers are, full truck campers with all of the accoutrement, and some of them don't have showers. There's obviously outside showers if you're, in the middle of nowhere. There's all kinds of exterior shower options. There's portable showers. There's things you can get wherein you can spray water, but you can also just sponge bath. You can wipe down. There's a lot of ways to get clean. But the traditional system, the system that is most used by most van lifers, is get a gym membership and use the gym. And a lot of those spaces are closed. And for some people, that's also where they fill up their water bottles and do all these other things. And now those resources are cut off. So if you have a family or a friend or somebody you can go to either park your van or stay at their house through this, and then you're just sheltering in place together, great. But there's a lot of people who don't have those options. And so resources there, depending on getting access to, are cut off. If you're in a small vehicle, your storage options are small. So it's even if you get dry goods, where are you going to put them? There's only so much space for you and the goods, and your ability to continue to live out of the thing you're in. If you go really far out, obviously you may not have, if your only option is to go find some land far out, now you're separated from stores. And so again, it becomes how much can you carry with you to survive for as long as you can before you have to go back into town. A lot of state parks and stuff like that are starting to close off as well. So even those paid camping options have been limited. And so I think right now, a lot of people who otherwise would have argued that they don't feel that way in a normal world are probably feeling a lot more quote unquote homeless than they did before this whole thing started. But I also think, people are finding solutions, and there are people who've, gone back to traditional housing or staying in traditional housing. But there's also a lot of van lifers and RVers who are just making it work. And both options are okay in this situation, and people are figuring it out and figuring out their resources and what they should do that's the best choice for them. And I think that's great. So in some way, my ideas shifted in I see where that legal definition is really, really important in the situation, i.e., do you have an actual address that you can go to, that is secure, that you can stay at, indefinitely, because it's either yours or your family or, always that place you could have gone back to, in the worst situation, which I think for nomads, this is the worst situation. Not being able to interact with the world is pretty severe. But also, there's so many people I've, looked at on YouTube, people I haven't watched in months, I'm going to be honest, who I was just curious how they were handling the situation. And there's so much resourcefulness, and I don't think it 100% shifted. It just given me some new thoughts on what it means to sort of disconnect from that traditional housing. So actually, I changed my mind. My thought hasn't changed so much. I still think my favorite answer, even though it wasn't the popular answer, is it depends on the person. That's all I got for you. I'll see you in the next video. Patreon has become a much more critical part of my survival, so thank you so much to my Patreon supporters.